aging particularly, so we'll see.
All right, sounds good. Emma?
Aging. It's the process of getting older.
It is. It is.
I can get on board with that.
I think we all can. Let's start out with a little intro about ourselves. So, Ben, you want to start?
Sure. I'm a junior here at Miami. I'm an accounting and business analytics co-major, so I'm pretty busy. And I love talking about ideas like this and where the world's going and what it all means.
All right, and I'm a junior also. I'm a mechanical engineering major with the Spanish linguistics minor, and I don't really know that much about this stuff, but...
But we're happy to have you here. You'll bring us the... I forget, what's the word we're looking for here? The layman's view.
Okay.
Well, who are you, Kyle?
I'm Kyle Armstrong. I'm from San Diego originally, but I'm studying here at Miami. I'm a junior biology major, and I just wanted to make a show about the future and what it means to be alive. But for real though, this show is actually it's called the Fifth Stage Podcast. First of all,
yeah. And what is that? What is that all about?
What does it mean? Well, I'm glad you asked, Ben, because it actually is in reference to the demographic transition, which is the process of population growth throughout society. And so right now, America's in the fourth stage of that, where there's stagnant growth, and so population has kind of leveled off. And the fifth stage is what we're about to enter, which is declining growth, because there's old people that are dying.
Oh no.
Yeah, and there's not enough kids being born to replace them. So that's kind of what it's about. And this show is kind of aimed to just bring ideas that you might not have ever thought about to the forefront and just have an hour to just think about it. So yeah, cool stuff. Because, this is going to happen whether you like it or not. So you might as well think about it and put some thought into it, just to be informed.
Right, and unlike these old people, we'll be living in this future world, hopefully.
Hopefully. So yeah, that's what we're all about here at the Fifth Stage. And so let's just go into a little bit about what we're talking about today. So population growth and how an aging population is going to impact the future. So let's start out with some stats that I have from the UN World Report on Aging, so it's a reliable source. But here we go. So one of the more interesting things that I thought was that by the year 2050, there's expected to be 2.1 billion people above the age of 65. So that's a lot of people.
So what percentage of the world's population is that?
That's 20% of the world's population.
So 1 in 5 people will be elderly.
1 in 5 people are going to be on the senior citizen list as it's defined right now.
We're all going to get that 60-cent coffee at McDonald's.
Pretty much. Everyone's going to be going to Denny's for those sweet discounts.
Theaters will be going bankrupt.
It's going to be an interesting time, that's for sure. But these are all just forecasts right now. Currently, for reference, there's 901 million people above the age of 65. So it's almost more than doubling, actually, within a 40-year span, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. And the mechanism behind that was the baby boomer generation has finally all grown up, and they didn't have enough kids to replace the cycle. So now it's declining. But yeah, what's another cool thing we got here? Actually, old people are the fastest growing age demographic of anything. So, which is kind of strange, but I guess it makes sense.
Right, since it's such a wide range. Once
65
you turn
and up. Yeah. So it is pretty big range, and there's a lot of implications from that. And another cool thing is that by 2030, so this is only 10 to 15 years from now, there's going to be more people 60 years or older than kids aged 0 to 9, which I think that's pretty crazy.
So what has happened, what kind of advances have made this
this possible?
shift happen? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I think one of the driving factors is that decreased mortality. So people are just living longer. And so the lifespan right now for someone born in America is 82 years. That's the average lifespan. In Japan, which is the highest, it's 84 and a half years. So it's definitely people are just living longer. But also there's decreased birth rates.
So something that I read was that the infant mortality rate has gone down significantly. So people aren't having as many kids because there's a better chance that every kid that they have is going to survive. And
Yes.
That's something that makes this more of a permanent shift rather than just like a cycle.
Yes, that's true. Actually, this is something that's like going to continue on into the future unless there's some, I don't know,
Catastrophe.
another baby
Some
boomer
apocalypse.
generation. But one of the interesting things about that, what you said, Emma, is with infant mortality going down, places that are in developing countries like Kenya and Africa and India and stuff like that, there's just a massive child population there now, which is crazy because the rest of the world is seeing the opposite of that. But so that could potentially lead to them, becoming a major economic center in the future. But what are some of the problems that are going to be caused by this? Right. Wait, any ideas?
Just off the top of my head, from like an American perspective, Social Security comes to my mind right away because we hear a lot about that with politics and healthcare, especially. And I'm not sure, but I think the age when you are able to start drawing from Social Security hasn't changed since it was set, right?
Yeah, I think it's 65, and it's
Right.
still 65.
Right. So I know there's been a lot of pushback from political interest groups.
From AARP.
Yeah, AARP.
The biggest lobbying group in America.
They're not sponsoring this. We're going rogue.
Yeah, actually, that is one of the biggest issues in America right now, or that America's probably going to face, is that Social Security is going to bottom out. It's already a very defunded program and not very well-funded program. But what happens when, you double the amount of people trying to draw from it all at once? It's going to be a big issue, for sure.
And you're not doubling the amount of people contributing to it.
Exactly. Exactly.
So do you guys think that, in just that instance, the age should be changed to when you can start drawing from Social Security? If people are retiring, older than they used to, shouldn't, that age also shift upwards?
Yeah, I'd tend to think so.
Yeah, I think it should because once they can't provide for themselves anymore is basically when that has to kick in. So if they're still working past the age of 65, or they can still work past the age of 65,
Yeah, no, I see what you mean.
Yeah. You would say, a 65-year-old today is probably, in general, a lot healthier than maybe one, 60 or 50 years ago, right? So they're more able to work, in theory?
Yeah, and actually, that's one of the things, a lot of old people are staying in the workforce, right? One of my friends, their dad retired and then rejoined the workforce after because they were like, well, I'm still healthy and, now I'm just bored,
Mm-hmm.
So if you're able to work, it seems like people still want to contribute. But if you're contributing, should you be able to draw from the retirement funds that early? It's the question of the ages.
Off the top of my head, I would say probably not.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
It's hard to
Especially
justify.
because of all the problems.
Right.
Yeah. It is tricky because America is very, AARP drives a lot of, the politics in America. One of the interesting things that Japan has been doing, and Japan, by the way, is the most far along in the demographic transition, so they are the oldest country on Earth right now. Let me check. I think for them, by 2050, there's going to be only 2.1 people to support each old person. So there's only 2.1 young people to support each old person in Japan, which is insane. And that's not a very sustainable practice. And so what they've done is a very radical program which is called the long-term care insurance, and it was implemented in the year 2000. So it's been around for a little while. But essentially what it does is it offers people $2,900 a month for insurance, and there's no copays. So the government is just like providing for them. On the, I guess the reasoning that they're able to keep contributing for longer. So if you're able to stay in the workforce and like you need that money just to like take care of medicine or something, then you can still like do jobs and other like, you know, just tasks that aren't too complicated. So yeah.
And I'm assuming that's like a tax that Japanese like citizens pay to support that program.
Yes, I'll have to check that, but I'm pretty sure that's the thing. I'll try and cite all these things that I'm quoting from too. I'll like make a website and cite them somewhere, just so people know. Like I'm not just like making all this up.
Yeah, I also heard that.
Yeah, but it's pretty interesting actually because this program, they interview each person that wants to apply for it individually and get a bunch of their data, and then it's sent through an AI that analyzes it and gives them multiple options, and then it like gives them the best options for them, and then they are able to talk with someone and be like, okay, here's your options that the computer said were like best for you. Like, what do you want? So it's pretty interesting that it's a very personal approach to healthcare, and how I don't know it needs to be there because it's such a big problem. But yeah, it's cool. I thought that was interesting.
What do you think are the reasons that Japan, like in particular, is the oldest country in the world? Do you think it's like a cultural thing? Social, like economic thing?
So, one of the things we talked about was that Japan doesn't have as much immigration as other countries. Like, they have hardly any immigration, so that doesn't pull down the average age the way that it does here in the United States.
Right. Because it's usually younger people immigrating to a country, not elderly ones that already have an established life somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, right after World War II, there was a big boom in economics there that was driven by like a large young population. But that population kind of, they advanced as a society so quickly that they reached the demographic transition way faster than any other country because they were just like exploded with wealth. And so they didn't have as kids as sooner. Like, whereas America, it was a slower process. Japan was just like instantly like there's a baby boomer and then no one else. So that's one of the big reasons.
And America is just on that same trend, just at a slower rate.
Yeah, America's actually artificially slowed down because of immigration. So immigration coming into the country provides a lot of younger people. And that's one of the programs Japan's been doing, is trying to get people from the Philippines, another developing country, to like move to Japan just to support their aging population, which I found kind of interesting. But they have a lot of very radical programs just because they have to like start testing out ideas right now. So they're a very good model for what most of the rest of the world's going to have to start adopting soon. One of the other big issues that is coming up is they need people just to work in nursing homes, because if there's so many old people, as in the case of Japan, they have like whole cities, like literally like towns that are just old people. I forget one of the names for it. It was Saitama City, which, I don't know. Ben, you want to give an anime interlude?
Sure. A little anime history lesson. Saitama is the main character of a popular new anime based off a webcomic called One Punch Man. And he is not elderly. He's quite young, but it's a very interesting show. I think if anyone's interested in Japan and their culture, I'd give it a look.
Yeah, a good interlude there. But it is one of the Saitama City is one of like the oldest cities in Japan, like just population wise, because everyone's moved out that had to like find other places to work, I guess. But yeah, so one of the things Japan's been doing to combat that is like immigration or robotics, and we'll get into that later. But let's see. We have some dead air right now because I'm reading through my notes. So if you guys want to converse.
So, Emma, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would assume that with like the situation Kyle just described to us, where like more people are being required as their job to like take care of the elderly who cannot work, I assume that really slows down their economy. When you think,
Why?
because old people don't contribute to the economy, right? Not that much. I mean, they buy things, but not as much as like working people, and they don't like put anything back in theory. And then more people are being required to like spend their jobs like contributing to the elderly, which is kind of just like a black hole, I would assume, economically, because there's no like return on that.
Yeah, no, you're actually right. That was the point I was looking for in my notes. But pretty much a lot of global investors are really worried about this because the economy is slowing down globally now, because it's not just a Japan thing. It's a global phenomena, except for in rare places like Africa and India. But it's a global phenomena. And so investors are very worried about how this is going to stagnate the economy. One of the interesting things I found about that, which there's surprisingly little about the aging population, which I found kind of strange because it's a big problem. But one of the interesting things was in Japan, they're finding that the elderly population there is more willing to spend than other generations before because they're healthier and they're more like, they see their life as like still having a lot more meaning because their government has placed programs to like specifically for them.
So they feel like
they still feel like they're contributing in some sense. Whereas in the past, it used to be like, oh, you're old, you're out of here.
Yeah, your life is
forfeit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. In one of my marketing classes, we talked about generations in America and like how they spend money differently. So like you market to them differently. And the baby boomers obviously have a lot different interests and needs
the
than like
millennials.
the millennials, right? And it was interesting. The generation in between, one of the generations in between baby boomers and millennials, it's Generation Y, which is like the generation right after baby boomers, like born like 1960s, 1970s. And they, more than any other generation in America, spend the most money on like luxury products, like cruise ships and like vacations and places like that, because they feel they have more disposable income than maybe like younger parents today or like young adults today.
That's interesting, actually. One of the big things in Japan I was reading is that a lot of investors there, or like business entrepreneurs, are just marketing specifically for the older generation. So they'll have stores like, and one of the interesting ones, I say interesting a lot, which I'll probably have to work on, but one of the cool things was there was a cafe literally just for people to meet up that were like caretakers and like exchange information about how they're like taking care of their family. Because in the past, it used to be a very like family-based system, especially in Japan and China, where like you as a kid had a duty to like take care of your parents when they got older. So they go there and just like talk about like how they're coping with it, and they have experts come and talk about it. And there was a store, like kind of a drugstore type thing, that had sections literally just for adults or older people, which was pretty interesting. And they have grocers that will like carry rice to them because they can't carry heavier stuff. So they have a lot of business opportunities there, but it's kind of disguised because you don't see the elderly as being like, oh, we need to get the economic growth there, but that's where it is now in
Right.
Japan. So it is a bit deceptive. Yeah, that there is like some stuff there.
Right, once you like shift the culture to like adapt to that.
Yeah.
I wonder if that would happen in America as much as Japan, since they do have maybe more of a like cultural respect for the elderly than maybe like other countries
Yeah,
do.
America doesn't have much respect for the elderly, which is unfortunate. Man, this is taking a weird turn. But there's, on top of that, actually, one of the UN statistics was most of the aging populations in America are going to be in the urban areas, as opposed to traditionally it used to be in rural areas, which I don't know how that's going to impact society, but what do you think potential outcomes could be of that? Because imagine, like, the cities are going to be filled with, like, and it's for practical reasons, just because, like, hospitals are more easier to access in
Right.
cities, and there's more, like, stuff.
I wonder if that could result in like younger people wanting to like not live in cities.
Oh, yeah.
Which seems like that's
a
like
cultural backlash.
right. They like move back to the country instead of like in generations past, like they would leave maybe like their small towns to like go to the city when they grew up. Now it might be like the reverse.
Huh. That could actually
That's just a
happen.
conjecture though. I have no sources for this.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that, but it makes sense. Yeah, I was thinking about that. It's gonna be weird, like if you went to like Saitama City or something like that. Like, I don't know, you go out in the afternoon and it's like no one's out there or
Right.
something.
You're like the youngest by far there.
Restaurants
Yeah.
close at like 5 p.m.
Yeah, and also I found a cool statistic. Like, there's more golf courses in America now than McDonald's, because people are retiring and wanting like something to get out and exercise and do.
Wow.
Isn't
That's
that
like-
surprising?
That's hard to even imagine.
I know.
Like, just like spatially, like they fit more whole golf courses and
I guess. I'm not sure. I don't have the source for that on hand, but I did read it yesterday.
it's
so
a powerful picture either way.
It is pretty incredible, though, either way. But yeah, I was like, wow, I guess like we haven't noticed it, but there has been like a definite like economic shift towards serving more of an older clientele. So let's see, what else should we talk about here? How about let's get into this robotics versus immigration debate. So in Japan, because they don't have much of an immigration program yet, like people aren't moving to Japan actively, there's been a lot of research towards robotics and how robotic caregivers or robotic, like, I don't even know, like automated caregivers will help alleviate the stress on that sector of the economy versus immigration. Because in America, we have enough immigration where it's like a very real debate, whereas in Japan, it's like, oh, we need robotics.
It's
So,
like a fact of
Yeah.
life.
so I don't know. I think both sides have some merit to them, but
Yeah. Just off the top of my head, that seems to make sense for Japan because it has, right now, like a stable population level. It seems like it's not growing. Maybe in the future it'll decrease when like this current elderly generation dies. So automation seems to make sense. But I wonder, like, I don't think that would work sense in a country with like a growing population. Because the way I see it with like automation, the way like people would generate like money for themselves would be like owning the machinery, right?
yeah.
And like using that to like produce a profit. But with a growing population, like some people would own the machinery, and like what would the younger like generation do? There'd be no like role for them to fill if it's all covered with automation.
Yeah, it is an interesting issue because in Japan, the technology is still like too expensive to really fully implement. One of the things I was looking at, like, they have this really cool robot that can like hold like trays and deliver food and stuff to people, but the sensors in the hand each cost like $200,000. So it's like, well, that's not very viable yet. But they're definitely looking into that. So I don't know. It would be weird to see like a fully automated society like just taking care of the elderly, but
Yeah, like in Wall-E.
yeah, like
If anyone's
well,
seen that movie.
that could be the future we're headed towards, though. At least Japan's headed towards.
Right. I wonder if Japan tried any programs like instead of like trying to like fix and like be able to adapt with like their aging population, like programs to like make their population younger, not by like killing old people, but like encouraging their people to have more young children.
Yeah, that's one of the ideas that's been presented. I don't know in Japan specifically, but definitely in other countries, is they're looking at giving like tax breaks and tax exemptions to people that are willing to have more kids, which is interesting because it's like the opposite of what China's been doing. So that's kind of weird. I don't know how I feel about that though.
I could see a big debate with people who might be upset about that if they don't want to have children, because then they would feel like they're being like
Screwed over,
like cheated by the government.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure America tried to do something like that, or one of the politicians campaigned on giving like tax breaks for having more kids. He didn't win, but it was definitely like a popular idea at the time, which is weird. Like we haven't heard anything about that. It was before our time, but yeah. Let's see what else. Another interesting thing about Europe is in the yellow right now, which is like, let me check this. Yellow means they have 25 to 30% of their population is over 65. So they're like the next big target. Japan's in like over 30% of their population is elderly, but Europe is getting there. And one of the things that might help alleviate their problems, which is something you wouldn't expect, but the refugee crisis there has been leading to a huge influx of young workers in that area, which might slow down in America given the current political climate. So we might have to rethink some things. Not saying anything there, but I thought that was kind of weird how something that seems like such a big net detriment to their society, like there's a huge debate in Europe right now about like what are we going to do with all these refugees, but it's like we actually need younger people, so this is a good thing.
Right. Do you think maybe like historically wars have been like good at like making populations like grow and like decreasing their age? Because that seemed to happen like after World War II for America in particular, and maybe other countries like Japan, because like their middle-aged population dies in the war, and then maybe like socially they're encouraged or feel the need to like have more children because of that like gap that's created by like casualties.
I wonder.
And then with this like Syrian refugee situation too, it like forces younger people who can leave countries that are war-torn to leave them and go somewhere else.
Yeah, and they can pursue like the American dream, right, or whatever, like
right.
Whereas in Syria or like during the war, you can't really pursue like, oh, this is what I want, like to start a family. Whereas we've all seen that, so it's like, oh, you know,
right.
But that's something that they can now pursue. I wonder, it'd be interesting to look up like the Lost Generation. Have you heard of that?
Mm-mm.
That was one of the generations after, I think, World War II in Poland, where like a whole generation was just gone. And I wonder how the society changed to adapt to that.
Right. Because then you just have like elderly people and young people, like mostly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So then, yeah, that would be interesting because then once the elderly people die, like, like the younger people, like, are like the beginning of like the new like generation,
Society.
like cycle. Yeah.
It is strange. Let's talk about like retraining, because one of the big ideas people are talking about is keep older people in the workforce for as long as possible. Because
What?
yeah, no, because what was it?
So they can like contribute to the economy.
Yes, they can keep contributing.
not be a drain.
Japan, pretty much. Japan's been doing that a lot, where they have people in limited time, like part-time jobs, so they'll only work like a couple hours a day, and will do like easier stuff. Like, oddly enough, like janitorial stuff is one of the big things, because like people can still sweep and contribute in that way. So that's one of the big things. Like, we should keep them there. But I was thinking, what about in more of like an intellectual capacity? If people are still like there intellectually, obviously, old people have seen a lot. You know, they have a lot of stories and wisdom to contribute to society. So maybe like sponsored philosophy programs or something like that, where anyone can do it and just kind of on their own or get a living income from the government, produce philosophy or something.
Right. That would be interesting because I feel like in America, like we all know like old people like have lived this whole like history, right, and have all these experiences, but I feel like that's just not really like thought of as like important, you know? Like no one wants to like hear old people's like life stories, even though it could be like useful and it is like a unique thing.
Yeah, I definitely want to like listen to it. That's a good segue because one of the big things America's going to have to deal with is a psychological shift where we as a society have always like viewed old people as kind of like a drain and like you don't really want them in the economy, right? Because our whole like products or like our whole philosophy in business was like we want youth and creativity in the workforce, right? But maybe we should start getting a shift towards like, oh, we want like wisdom and like patience in the workforce kind of thing, which is more of like an older characteristic. So if we could get that psychological shift of like trying to get more patience or like that would be more important, something like that. Obviously, it's going to take some doing, but it definitely, I think, would be a good start.
Yeah, and I mean it's logical. Like you need a mixture of wisdom and creativity. You can't just
we've definitely kind of like
pushed
that to the side in our government.
Do you think, like in America in particular, old people, or do you think people want, like, have a more negative viewpoint of like becoming old than maybe like past generations have? Because I would say now it seems like, you know, everyone wants to stay young and like they see very little benefit in becoming old. Like that's just really seen as like a negative in our culture. I wonder if the reason that is because there are becoming more and more old people. So people like want to become that less. And so they like view the elderly as like,
well, as
less.
a society, we've definitely like promoted youth as like the one thing that like you should hold above everything else. Like just look at Hollywood for that, you know. So yeah, it would be interesting to get like more stories, like especially in Hollywood or like movie making, get more stories from like that point of view,
right?
As opposed to just like, oh yeah, it's cool being young, you know.
Yeah. And not just assuming that like old people, like they're like still alive, but like their life is like over, you know, like they're not changing or like experiencing.
I think we tend to do that with everyone though, like even with kids, you know, we treat kids as like not being conscious pretty much. We're like look down on them.
That's true.
And it's the same with old people. Like you treat them like, oh yeah, like, oh hey, like look at that old guy, you know, like
like oh,
but it's like he lived a life, you
right?
know, like
he's been in wars, like you know, he's had like a family, you know.
But we just write that experience off as like, oh, that's not meaningful,
right?
So I definitely would love to see that in my lifetime, like a push towards like accepting more people as like, I don't know, valuable in society.
This is a tangent, but what do you think's like the most like idealized or respected like age to be in America, or like age range?
Probably 20s to 30s.
Yeah, I would say that too. That's like the up and coming people. That's
the ones who are like actually like
that's like
alive,
like Steve Jobs, you know? Like going out and like living, figuring out ideas. Yeah, that is interesting. Like,
because I bet Japan would have, I would assume like their most respected age would probably be not like super elderly, but maybe like more like 40s to 50s. I would assume.
Yeah. Especially in China with Confucianism, you know, like the whole like filial piety thing.
Ancestor worship.
Ancestor worship, yeah. They did like, I don't know. You've seen Mulan. You know.
We all know what we're talking about here.
Moving back to to the topic at hand. Let's stop talking about Mulan for a second. For 1 second, please. One of the big theories is we kind of touched on, but if Africa and India remain like youthful, we could leverage our infrastructure to help increase them. So get more people in like finance to help like developing nations, because they don't have much infrastructure as like computing power and stuff. Like they only have 5% the computing power that we do, you know. So if you could leverage our resources to help build them, you wouldn't have to like build a whole new like resources over there, kind of thing.
I would say that's probably the best way forward for like countries that are maybe like stagnating in their age, because like these other countries like are developing and like will have like their own baby boom where like more people are being born and they're all like young, so they can all like contribute to the economy. So like
I feel like it's kind of dangerous though, having that foreign influence just like
right
pervading through your culture.
That's true.
But it is, most of the economic forecasts I've seen say it's pretty sustainable for both sides for the near future, or like a good amount of time.
I'd say the trend's probably like it's always been like a more powerful nation or country that like goes to a developing one and like extracts resources from it for like its own gain, and then eventually like that country like pushes them off, like America with Britain, and then America was like the emerging power, and now it's just we're gonna be like the like empire, like the old world in this situation. So we might as well get like something out of it in like a mutually beneficial way if possible, because otherwise like
Otherwise what do you do?
they're gonna grow. We might as well like try to benefit from it.
That's a good way of looking at it. I still feel kind of weird if I'm just benefiting, like
Yeah. Or maybe like people in America should be more willing to like go to these emerging countries where there's probably like a lot more opportunity.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a huge stigma in America, like of staying in America, which it makes sense in some respects, but like I don't know, it shouldn't be treated as such a weird like, oh, you're leaving the country.
I agree that's seen as like insane. Like, why would you want to do that if you don't have to?
Yeah, definitely. I guess that is one of the big trends in history, is that one place has to go. Like, you can't just stay in your own area for so long.
Right. Like, because you'll get old and die if you don't like, if you refuse to change.
You'll eventually like run out of stuff.
Right. And that really makes me wonder, eventually, like, even these countries like India and like African countries, they'll eventually,
what's
in theory,
the next thing?
with like progressing technology, they'll become like old too, right? And like the standard of what is old will change too, but probably not as fast as like technology.
People live into like 200 years.
Right. And then once there's like nowhere that's like new, like on Earth, what's next?
Then do you just have to like tear down like immigration control kind of, and just let like a free flow of like ideas and people go around?
I think at that point people would like be begging, countries would be begging for like immigrants and like.
Yeah. I guess it would be a competition between cities at that point, not necessarily countries.
Yeah. If they're all old and at like the same like level.
Yeah. I like people just like wanting young people and like a competition for young people.
Man, it's not a pretty picture.
No, it isn't.
Just an old world where the younger.
So do you think we should encourage like having programs that encourage like young people, like tax incentives for having kids kind of thing?
Yes.
All right, Ben Harmon's on record as saying yes to that answer, everyone.
Well, I could see that as like a good solution to the problem, but at the same time, it might cause other problems too.
Yeah, because what happens when automation comes?
Yeah, and then like
and
also
people might be having kids
just
that they
for
can't support,
yeah.
which already happens, but it become much worse.
Yeah, that's
for
what I'm
the
thinking.
tax
like,
benefit.
They're gonna have a kid for the tax benefit and then neglect it.
It's true.
I want to. I still say yes, but less confident.
Less emphatically?
Yeah.
Okay. It is, I guess we need to get some people on board, like just to start talking about this, you know.
Yeah.
Because looking around, I was expecting to find much more resources about this topic. Because to me, I'm like, yeah, this is a big thing that's happening, and yeah, countries will like change when they absolutely have to. At least that's my philosophy. Is that like when they're pushed to the edge, they'll start like looking for solutions. But I think you should do a little more like thinking ahead, like, hey, this is happening. We should
Yeah.
put some thought into it.
Do you think that could be because, like, maybe in like America specifically, like the elderly, like through AARP, exert like the most political like clout and power, like out of any like
It's true.
demographic group?
They're the biggest lobbying group.
So maybe they don't want things to change, possibly, you know?
Well, and they probably don't like care as much. Like they're not going to be around to deal
Right.
with it.
Well, Emma, that's pretty
Yeah.
controversial.
Just saying.
But do you guys think that maybe politically, like the elderly are too like overemphasized in like policy decisions and
Yeah, I think if you're going to have a lower age limit on voting, like you can't vote till you're
There should be an
18,
upper
there
age
should be an
limit.
upper age.
whoa. But what would it
That's
be?
pretty
What would it be?
I don't know.
Just some arbitrary number, just like 18 is.
Yeah, that's not up for me to decide. Or we can remove the lower age limit, but
Yeah. Or maybe
That's
some
dangerous.
Maybe like
too.
little kids vote. Like,
maybe some
that
kind
kinda
of
makes sense.
test that you have to pass every time you vote. But who makes that test, you know?
we're getting off topic here. Let's bring it back to the main topic. So I was thinking one of the other big ideas to solve this crisis. I did air quotes there for those of you who couldn't see, which is all of you. And I guess it is a crisis, so I shouldn't have done air quotes. But one of the big ideas is that they want, Japan especially is doing this, but encouraging women to re-enter the workforce. Because for so long in America, it was like, oh, you become a housewife and then you're done kind of thing, you know? And so if you can encourage women to re-enter the workforce and start contributing to the economy again, that would be a huge way to alleviate this pressure. Still, it's like a stopgap measure because
Right.
eventually
Right.
women are going to age too.
Right. But yeah,
That's like a whole half of the population.
Yeah,
Right.
seriously though.
Contribute to
that
it,
makes
so.
sense. So, like, if you don't have enough young people working, you should try to get all the young people
You can.
you can, regardless of what their education is or their gender, or like anything like that.
I think America's going to be one of the big places where that's going to be contested, just because I don't know, it's so ingrained in our culture, you know,
that women.
that
Is it
women.
still though?
I-
Because
I-
feel like
yeah.
that was a while ago.
I
Well,
would-
no,
I would
I know
disagree.
it's not now, but for the current housewives kind of thing, to get them to re-enter,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what they grew up with, you know.
Yeah. So basically, try to make it so no one's a housewife, ideally.
Not necessarily, but something like that.
Yeah, because then they have a more physical, economic
Impact
output. Yeah.
It is. I don't know, just a thought.
Another idea is, what if this results in even younger people working to
Even younger,
Yeah.
decreasing the age limit.
right, exactly, to compensate. And that's obviously
That's pretty controversial.
right.
But
What
I
is
guess
the
desperate
minimum
times.
working age?
In certain jobs, not all jobs.
I
Isn't
think
it,
the minimum
16?
is 16 in America,
And
but not for all jobs.
right. And for some jobs, you can work younger than that if you have special.
What's the
permission.
minimum age for the presidency?
I think it's
35.
35.
Oh my God, it's ridiculous.
Do you think it should be 18?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would
Maybe
agree with that too.
Ice Town, but on a national level.
Yeah,
But that's kind of, I wouldn't want an 18-year-old in office.
but they should be
you're gonna-
allowed to run, and
Yeah.
if they win, they win.
Yeah.
Well, if there's so for the presidency, do you think there should be a maximum age too that you can run?
I guess if we're putting a maximum age on voting, there really should be.
Yeah. I don't know. It depends. I don't think
I-
necessarily, as long as there's like a competency.
Right. Yeah. I would view that kind of different from voting because to run, it's almost like not about you. It's about like the voters, right? And if
Yeah.
they want you, you should be president, like in a democracy, right?
Yeah.
No matter like how competent you are, if the people want you, you should become president.
Yeah. I guess that's the democracy we have.
Yeah.
So it makes sense. Let's talk a little bit about KFC.
Oh.
Just a little fun story right now.
Sponsored.
So earlier I said like in Japan especially like there was this push to like Americanize, and that showed with like trying to get the traditional like American view of like women as housewives and stuff like that. But one of the weirder things that came of that was KFC took advantage of this like American craze, and then in the 1970s they made an ad campaign that said Americans love KFC for Christmas, and that's all like that's what they eat on Christmas Day. And this ad campaign was so successful that now to get your bucket of KFC chicken on Christmas Day, you have to reserve it like months in advance.
In Japan.
In Japan, and they'll have statues of the Colonel, like all dressed up as Santa, along the roads, and that still exists today. That Japanese people go and get chicken on Christmas.
Just
That's
another
wild.
foreign power pushing their views.
It's pretty wild.
That is. Do you think there's any like example of that like in America where we like think we're emulating like a different nation's culture, but like we're totally getting it wrong?
Definitely.
Taco Bell, maybe.
Yeah.
Is an instance of
I wonder, like, in America, the American accent was traditionally British. The British, like, accent arose during the Victorian era after America had, like, left. So, technically, we have the original
We have
British
the
accent.
original- Yeah, we actually studied that in my
Yeah.
Spanish linguistics class.
So, I guess that kind of counts. We're emulating
Ours
Britain.
is actually a lot closer to standard English than theirs is. So.
Yeah. And playwrights say that Shakespeare sounds better in an English or American accent. So there you have it.
interesting.
Little tidbits here.
Japan also loves Kit Kats, I believe. They have like literally like hundreds of different flavors, like that
Oh,
we would
yeah,
find
they do.
very like disgusting. Yeah,
Yeah, but we have weird flavors of stuff too.
that's true. That's true. We have tacos made out of Doritos.
Yeah, I wonder what other cultures would have to say about us.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Like, which nation is generally seen as like the
The-
weirdest or like the grossest? Just on like in general.
I bet America.
Probably ours, yeah.
Yeah, I would
Just
say
because
probably.
there's the most exposure to
Yeah.
American culture.
So most opportunity to like be
To be like,
offended by
yeah.
it.
Yeah. What do you guys want to talk about next week? We've covered pretty much everything about this population growth issue. We don't have to choose a topic right now, but let's just like spitball.
Okay. What do you think, Emma? What are you
To-
passionate about?
We could interview an old person.
We
Put
can-
them on blast.
Yeah, I wanted to get someone to interview. Usually we're going to try and get interviews. This is our first show, obviously, and I'm not too confident about like going out and being like, hey, can you like be on our show? But it would be interesting to like get an actual like someone else's perspective because we're all like pretty similar demographics.
Right.
So
We could talk about something like
like space,
we could talk about space.
The final frontier.
Yeah.
the final frontier.
We might all kind of agree on that, though. Not that we like have to like disagree to like.
No, we need to like be at
It
each
needs to
other's
be
throats.
We could talk about like if we really wanted to get into it, like the economy or like capitalism.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Like what is the role of the government? That could be interesting. Like what should a government like be?
That's pretty controversial. We should save that for later.
Okay.
Once we're
okay.
more
We're going
established.
to alienate our
Yeah.
2 viewers.
Yeah, I mean, we just blasted soon to be like the biggest demographic.
Hey, we didn't
I don't think we
Yeah,
blasted
it's not their
them.
fault.
We're the
They're old.
crusaders
Yeah.
of this new era.
It's true. We have to.
We're just-
They're here. We have to be able to
Yeah,
like.
we're just trying to inform people, you know,
Yeah.
because I don't know, it's coming. It's like automation.
It's coming.
One of the I saw this cool thing about robotics. I'll show you guys the picture, but it's like this robot seal, and this is what Japan's been using, and Denmark especially too, is that they've been using this robot seal to like treat patients with Alzheimer's, I think, because it comforts them and it keeps them from like walking off and like getting into trouble.
So fluffy.
I know it's really cool. You should
Well,
look up
what's the difference between that and like just a stuffed animal?
I guess it has like emotions that people can recognize.
It's like responsive.
It's a little more responsive. But the cool thing in this interview with this guy who designed this robot, he was like, "So why'd you choose a seal for this? Because that's kind of a weird choice." And apparently people had too much interactions with cats and dogs, so they were like expecting too much out of it. So he did seals instead because no one's interacted with that. And also cat people didn't like the dogs and dog people didn't like the cats. So seals were just the universal like peacemaker animal apparently.
Oh.
But that's been used pretty successfully in a lot of countries to treat an older generation. Interesting stuff, huh?
It is.
It's definitely not what I had in mind when you said like
Robots?
robotic
Yeah.
Well,
caretaker.
here's another, like, this is a robotic caretaker.
Okay, that's more like what I was
Yeah,
picturing.
I've seen those kind. Before.
That one, it looks like a human, kind of vaguely. But this is the one that the sensors in in the hands cost $215,000. So it's not very viable.
I wonder if like elderly Japanese people are more willing to like be treated by a robot like that than maybe other cultures would
Yeah,
be.
that's one of the big things was Japan is so much more like accepting of robots, whereas America sees it as like, oh, like that's something we need to like defend against.
Yeah, they're the threat.
Yeah.
We can't let them around our
Because we grew
elders.
up with Terminator as like the robot, whereas they grew up with I don't even know.
like Astro Boy.
Yeah, Astro Boy.
That's true.
So Japan has always been like the front runner in robotics technology, just because of that, probably.
And then I guess other nations reap the benefit of their like research.
Yeah. I guess that's what it's all about, huh? That's the advantage of loving robots as a society. We could talk about something similar to that next week, like techno fear in America.
Oh yeah. I'd say it's probably
I think it's waning in
Yeah.
our generation,
Yeah,
but
Yeah.
it's really like the older generation that's
they control the money.
yeah.
yeah.
And probably like techno fear is almost not completely, but I bet it's like primarily based on like
Y2K and stuff
yeah,
like
like
that.
movies and like stories
Yeah.
because there's not much like other reason, you know, and that's what like creates fear of it.
Well, we could talk about just a broader scope of like technology in general and how like how it's impacting society, which
Technology, good, or bad.
or like the internet. We could talk about that.
Yeah, that could be interesting. Oh, it'd be really good to have like a guest of like an old person.
Oh yeah, and a young person like
Yeah.
Steve Jobs, a
Like
Steve Jobs type.
type. Yeah.
Yeah, someone like that. Yeah, I guess that's all we have for today. But I don't know. Do you guys have anything else to add?
I think if there's a lower voting limit, there
That's what you want to finish
to
with?
not be hypocritical, there must be an upper limit of some sort.
We'll get into that next
Okay.
another episode for sure. I can guarantee you. We're gonna get into some more controversial views. This is one of like just to test the waters and be like, hey, here's some information. But we're gonna try and like tackle more like interesting stuff on a regular basis.
This one's more
More interesting.
certain.
Engaging.
Yeah, this is more. This is a more certain. Like, hey, this is happening, and you should think about it if you're listening. I don't know how many people are listening.
If you
but
plan to live in the world for
yeah, if you plan to live till 2050, which most of us are gonna
will,
will,
yeah.
gonna do. So, yeah, yeah, expect more interesting stuff. And I'm gonna try and make a website probably just to do that. And maybe get a social media account going. But that's all to come. And we'll have interviews usually.
Things
Hopefully.
to look forward to.
Yeah, and we're the fifth stage, in case you're wondering.
Should we have like an outro?
Like a sign off.
I wanted to get like some music, but this
Yeah.
room doesn't have anything to like do that with. Maybe I can prepare it on my computer and then do it, but
Do, 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 do. Fifth stage.
yeah, the fifth stage, everyone out there, all two of you. But yeah, have fun, have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week. So enjoy. And this is Kyle, and then we got
Ben here.
And Emma.
all right. That's the team. That's the fifth stage team.
Talk
All right.
to an old person if you see him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
ask their thoughts.
Value your old people.
All right. See you guys.